Week 3 of the planetary qualifiers are now in the books, and I can say that I did in fact top 8 one of those events. Boba Red Space Boba carried me to a top 8 berth, and that was my goal, to get that top 8 placement in one of these qualifiers. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the event and the deck itself. Welcome back, everyone. Yeah, Chomp got there. We got a top 8 berth. I went 6-1 in the Swiss after losing the first round, won 6 straight matches in order to get that top 8 placement. Came in at, I believe, 7th. Editing me, you'll put that up somewhere. It was a lot of fun. Did have to travel for this one. It was really cool, and that's kind of where I want to start out. Before I get into all the props and slops and everything, I will let everybody know that there will be chapters. You can click down if you want to skip ahead, but I wanted to give out some thank yous and everything before we get into it. This particular event was hosted by Games and Stuff down in Maryland. I had not had the opportunity to be at this store for any other game at any other point prior to this, and I walked in, I was immediately blown away. This is a really cool place. It was huge, had a huge selection. Staff was very cool. Everything was very on target the whole day, got everything through with a lot of efficiency. So first of all, I wanted to give a shout out to the store and the staff. I mentioned it to them as I was leaving. I just want to say thank you to them. But once again, thank you to the team that put this together. I have been blown away across the 2 PQs that I've been to, and pretty much all of the, I'll call them third-party Star Wars events, so the ones that were not hosted by FFG directly. We're talking locals, we're talking showdowns, we're talking, obviously, these PQs. All of the staff at all of these stores has been incredible and supportive and really trying to help the game grow, and this was absolutely no exception. And I'll be coming back to the stores momentarily, but focusing on Games and Stuff, like I said, this was a really cool place. I even mentioned to my wife, I would love to come back here, and any future events they hold, if I have the opportunity, I'm going to try and make the effort to go there. If you haven't had the chance, check them out. Speaking of giving out props, if you read a lot of tournament reports as I did back in the 90s when you were playing Magic, props and slops were a thing that was just like, this is what you do at the end of a tournament report. Well, I'm going to get them in at the front. Since I was able to top 8, I wanted to thank a few different people and I guess entities, we'll say. While I will say that I put in a ton of effort myself in testing and deck building and trying to keep abreast of different things, the fact of the matter is that you can't live in a bubble for this sort of stuff for competitive level events. So, like I said, just give a shout out to my locals, whether that's at Top Deck, that's at Red Caps, or that's at Alternate Universes. All 3 of those places, the players there have been spectacular, very supportive, and as mentioned, the stores as well. Each of these stores host a number of events. They've hosted showdowns. They obviously have their own locals weekly, and they also have hosted other events. I've talked about them here on the channel, so definitely check those places out if you're in the area and you're looking for a place to play Star Wars Unlimited. And of course, like I said, I got to give a shout out to all the players that have been at those locals. I won't run down the list, although I will say for this particular deck, shout out to Craig, because he did kind of put me on the path to playing this very space-centric deck list. Of course, I have to give a shout out to the Golden Dice guys. They were handling all the coverage for everything, always looking crisp as usual. Shout out to everybody that was helping them out casting. I know it was happening, but I was busy playing, so I'm not sure exactly who's on there yet. Haven't had a chance to go through everything, but a big thank you to them. I, of course, also want to say thank you to all my opponents. Everybody was super cool, and it was very nice meeting everybody that was at the event. But it wasn't just people that I've been able to physically interact with. Of course, it's also been on the internet. Shout out to the guys at KTOD, as well as Yoda Killer from the KTOD Discord, who I believe is on the Bothan Network team. You got to forgive me for that. I don't know all the different relationships. I have been talking to Ian in real life at tournaments, and shout out to Ian for getting a top 4 at this particular event, topped a number of other PQs. Fantastic player, cool dude. And I feel bad because I didn't get to say goodbye at the end, but he was mid-game, and I'm like, all right, I'll catch him later. But yeah, Yoda Killer was instrumental in kind of pushing this particular list. I was previously on for the last PQ, I don't want to say ground-centric, but a heavier ground leaning for this particular deck list, featuring some Greedos and Death Star Stormtroopers. They are very aggressive early units, and because of the untaps of Boba Fett, you can cheat them into play on various turns or even vomit your hand on turn one and present a significant clock right from the word go. However, over time and testing in the last couple of weeks did end up shifting away from that to this heavy space focus list. Two other things I wanted to shout out at the beginning, and if I missed something, hopefully I'll remember it later and either edit it in or we'll throw it out there as we go through. I, of course, have to say thank you to Ryan. He is one of our locals and the person whose spot I took to get into the PQ. So without him, none of this would have happened. So shout out to Ryan. And I also wanted to mention, I'm not wearing the shirt now, but I did meet a couple of people at the event. Shout out to all of those Gideon the Ninth fans. If you don't know what this is, it's a book series. There's going to be a fourth book that is to come to close out the storyline. The first three are Gideon the Ninth, Harrow the Ninth, and Nona the Ninth. The fourth will be Electo the Ninth. This is a fantastic book series. I can't say enough about it. If you want to hear more about it, I'd be more than happy to do a video talking about it because I was so excited. I had two people recognize Gideon on my shirt and, well, on the hat too. It's not this one. It's a different one. And I was thrilled. Like, that might have been the highlight of the day over top 8ing. And that's not an exaggeration. So just throwing that out there. Of course, if I missed anybody, not a slight, just a lot of stuff to remember, a lot of things to go through, and I'm trying to get this one up as quick as we can. All right, let's get into the part that everybody's actually here for. They want to hear about the deck, about the day, maybe, and how the tournament went and that sort of thing. So this is the overall list. It is a space-focused Boba Fett aggressive deck. Boba Fett 1, of course. Boba 2, I had high hopes for Boba 2 when he was first revealed and just hasn't come together. We'll see if maybe set 3 changes that. Now, even before I get into everything else, I, of course, want to remind everybody, yeah, I did make this other video a few weeks ago about Boba Fett, and I haven't forgotten about it. I just haven't had time because it caught me by surprise I would be able to play in this qualifier. I had a whole follow-up video recording. I was going to edit it, and then real life got in the way. And now that we have the third weekend, there's even more data. So I'm going to try and do my best to release that later this week. Emphasis on try. I'm going to do my best, and then we'll go from there. Spoiler alert, nobody's going to be happy about what I have to say. So I guess get your torches and pitchforks ready. So looking at the list itself, there's probably some surprising things in here, and there's some very obvious things. The obvious things are, of course, all of the notable red and yellow space units. If you're going to be space aggro, and this is something that I've been saying for a long time, literally before the game was released, that the lane system concerns me. There are a lot of things that you can look at in Star Wars Unlimited and be like, if they're not careful with this, this could get messy, ugly, whatever. I think the lane system is one of them, and I think it's the one that concerns me the most. So let's take a minute and talk about the actual early game boats. All of these ships represent your early game threats, and they will play into other roles later on. We'll talk about them individually, but realistically, you need to make sure you have a curve with this deck. You need to play a threat every single turn, ideally multiple threats, due to the Boba untaps or other circumstances. And then that way you can continue to overwhelm your opponent as you push through the game. This is going to come up a lot, but a lot of decks are soft in space, and that means that you're able to put a threat on the board that is likely not going to get traded into, especially if your opponent either doesn't understand what's happening or if they just happen to have a bad mulligan. I had multiple opponents over the course of the day say, hey, I mulliganed for my spaceships and I didn't find them, and they just lost. Most of the pieces are interchangeable. You will notice if you play this deck that there are certain times where you actually do want a cartel spacer on one, or you would prefer a 7th fleet over a punishing one, depending on what you're facing. This could vary from, hey, I want to be able to ram my spacer into their guy and then take it down with Tarkin Town so I can set up a lurking tie, or it could be, hey, I'm putting them on make an opening rather than takedown, so I'd want the punishing one to try and dodge a little bit more removal. Talking about gunship for a moment, this is, of course, one of your 3 power threats on turn 1, so you definitely want to see it early, but don't be surprised when you row this over the course of the game. I think that's going to be obvious to most people. However, you do have to be cognizant of your sequencing. If you don't attack with the gunship right away, don't be surprised if your opponent ends up taking it from you and then creating an awkward 2-for-1 scenario because they can run it into your guys. That means that you are kind of committing to that turn 1 action. Map those turns out ahead of time because it could come back to bite you. Kylo's Tie represents our other 3-power turn 1 ship. Alongside Cartel Spacer, they are our primary turn 1 plays. Now, Kylo's tie does have other utility. There are certain matchups, namely Hantu Blue, as well as various Ray builds, where, yeah, pillage and force throw can actually be threats. That may sound a little crazy. Why aren't you just vomiting your hand? But hey, sometimes you draw the 6-cost boats and they're stuck in your hand. And holding back that Kylo's tie can be relevant rather than resourcing it. And of course, there are going to be hands where you hit multiple ties. So there are ways to leverage it. There's also occasionally you'll have people slam a vigilance just for the heal. They can't remove, say, your punishing one with it. They can't get rid of a lurking tie, whatever it is. So they just mill by default. And every once in a blue moon, you'll get a free Kylo's tie off of it. Just something to keep in the back of your mind because it doesn't come up often enough and it would be very easy to miss the trigger. Speaking of unique ships, we of course are sporting Punishing One. It is one that I've considered shaving a copy of here or there in order to try and squeeze in other things. At the end of the day, this is a stat stick, similar to many of the other ships. You will sometimes get an untap. It's not impossible. It's just extremely unlikely. Often this comes at the cost of force choking something with experience tokens on it. Keep it in mind, these little bits of extra damage can add up. Disabling Fangfighter is another one that I'm not a huge fan of, but if you played any set 2 games, you could probably list off a dozen upgrades that you're concerned about. In this particular deck, you want to deal with entrenches. Spoiler alert, that'll come back up. 7th Fleet doesn't need a whole lot of introduction, so I'm going to sort of skip this one. Instead, I want to talk about Cartel Spacer. This is not your ideal turn 1 play, but instead a later turn play, namely your 4 resource turn. This can give you a lot of utility. Maybe tap down a Dark-Sabered up Sabine or something along those lines. It allows you to break the race in your favor because you tap down a K2, you tap down the aforementioned Sabine. It could be a 4-LOM, it could be whatever. Just be cognizant of the fact that many of your ships are not yellow. It's very easy to end up with like a Merc gunship, a Punishing One, and then go, yikes, I can't actually tap something with the Spacer. Last but of course not least is Lurking Tie. This is a mulligan for target. It almost auto wins a number of matchups in conjunction with the tie advance, which again, we'll talk about later. It kind of does auto win some matchups. There's an argument to try and bait removal, such as make an opening with 7th Fleet. However, I kind of just slam them personally and say, show me that you have it. Because if they don't, you just kind of take over the game immediately. And of course, an on-curve Lurking Tie into advanced is backbreaking. Next, I'm going to package all of the removal together, but we'll talk about the different components in turn. So early on, one of your best plays, your turn 1 play, is ISB Agent or Daring Raid to nuke their turn 1 play and then advance your entire board. ISB Agent we'll touch on momentarily. Daring Raid allows you to either remove their turn 1 play in the previously explained example, or of course you can clean things up that have run into your ships over the course of the game. It can help finish off a Space Sentinel, namely those pesky Concord Dawn defenders, and push comes to shove, it can also go face. Now there is a notable ground unit that I'm going to call attention to, besides Boba, and that's ISB Agent. This guy has probably been sitting in bulk bins and binders for a very long time for most people, but it is crucial here. In conjunction with Daring Raid and Tarkin Town, it means that you are very likely to eliminate your opponent's turn 1 play. That allows you to develop your board, and in previous versions, it could be ISB Agent plus Tarkin Town to kill Sabine's Battlefield Marine, play a Greedo, play a Death Star Stormtrooper, and then all of a sudden you have 7 power worth of units on the board. Your opponent has nada. That isn't an option here, but going ISB Agent into Kylo or Mercenary Gunship is still very powerful. Cartel Spacer is clearly worse, but it still represents you have 2 threats on the board, and guess what? You could always surprise strike the ISB Agent. It doesn't matter. It's still a body. It can still go face. It also, I will point out, is relevant in delaying actions, forcing your opponent to do something. If they get into a situation where it's you start playing stuff out, you start attacking, and they're just passing, you can absolutely steal away initiative, even if it means you don't deploy a Boba, even if it means you don't do X, Y, or Z, and you can continue to apply pressure. It allows you to play some mind games, gives you another option. Plus, since he only costs 1, he's air quotes free with the Boba on tap, whether that's on turn 1 plus the Tarkin Town or on a later turn. And because of the way Tarkin Town and ISB add up, which is the simple arithmetic of 3 plus 1, it will eliminate Concord Dawn interceptors, which is kind of the bane of your existence from a variety of different decks. Notably, last point about him, he is also Imperial. We'll come back to that when we talk about the TIE Advanced. Now, the rest of the deck kind of fits, again, things that you would expect. Main deck, anyway. We have the No Good to Me Deads. They are crucial in boba mirrors. And I use the term mirror loosely. You can refer to my other video for that. Force chokes are important to eliminate both the Sabine Darksaber play, although you are pretty favored against Sabine anyway. It allows you to also address significant ground threats, say a 4-LOM or something like that, that can reasonably race you. And of course, a 4-LOM into a Zuckuss on your deploy is going to be a bad time for, well, I would say everyone involved, but really it's just your side. Just make sure you're sequencing things right. Notably, also, Force Choke means that you could go on turn 3, your resource 4 turn. You can Force Choke, untap, play a 3-cost ship because the Force Choke will essentially have a reduced cost. There's a lot of ways to cheat a lot of these removal cards, and that allows you to both address your opponent's board while developing yours. No one's going to be surprised by Surprise Strike being in the list. Kind of ironic. That irony can be pretty ironic. Now, beyond that, Waylay, of course, is your catch-all answer. I was kind of low on them for a while, but it is a useful tool. It's just, it doesn't really come online, truthfully, until the boba flip turn, because if you try and play it prior to that, you just disrupt your own play pattern too much. You want to advance things every turn. You want to get more bodies on the board, overwhelm your opponent, because many of the ships are surprisingly sturdy. We're going to skip to the ships. We'll come back to Triple Dark because there's a few other thoughts on it. TIE Advance is a flex spot in this deck. It has been a variety of different things over time. I do want it to be a unit. Personally, I think it's important to ensure that you have a high density of units because if you notice, there's a ton of events in this deck. I mean, there's 18. And one of my complaints when I was playing Boba Yellow all through set 1 and into set 2 was sometimes you just get hands where you have like one body and maybe the body isn't even a turn 1 or 2 play. Like you mulligan and it's just a bad mulligan. There's a ton of events in these decks. And it is unlikely, but not impossible, for you to have a really clunky hand of like a ton of removal. And it happens. But having this extra set of bodies is important. It also fills in a gap because the 4 resource turn 3, is a very clunky one. You can see we have some early game stuff like turn 1 plays in Spacer, Merc, and Kylo. You have your turn 2 plays in all the 3 costs, but we don't have any actual 4 cost things. We're often trying to set up maybe a removal card into a 3 cost or 2 costs, something like that. It's a very clunky resource turn, which can come down to playing a Triple Dark. And again, we'll touch on that in a moment. But TIE Advance allows you to do a lot of really mean things. I won multiple games on the day by just playing Lurking TIE into TIE Advanced, and they can't stop it. There are some decks who just literally cannot answer that, and you just effectively win the game on the spot as long as you don't punt it into the stratosphere. I did that. I punted a few games. But TIE Advance has been all right. I did want to include it for a very long time. I've been pretty happy with it. I don't think I would cut it at this point. But again, it's a flex spot. Maybe a punishing one could get shaved to fit something else. You could tweak it a little bit, but the main deck is pretty solid. Next up is Ruthless Raider and Fetz Fire Spray. These are, of course, your late game threats. I will say Fire Spray, I'm not going to say it's bad, but it is probably the worse or lesser of the 2 6 costs. Generally speaking, you get more damage from a Ruthless Raider off of a Triple Dark because it's doing 6 to face, assuming it connects. But if they play a Sentinel, neither was going to connect anyway. It also, of course, allows you to impact the board and impact the board immediately again on a follow-up turn. Because while you are targeting ending the game on the Boba flip turn, let's be real, your opponent gets to play the game too, and that is not necessarily very likely. However, that isn't to say the Fetz Fire Spray is bad. You will absolutely get mileage out of this, and there are certain matchups, namely blue decks, where you want to see both. You want the Raiders probably pre-SLB / Snoke, because if they kill them, they're getting damage on the way out. Great, your opponent's in a tough spot. They SLB, they tapped out, slam Fire Spray, push for your final set of damage. Of course, you want to have multiple options in your hand so that way you can try and play around Avengers if that comes up. But if you're getting to that point in the game, you really need to close it out anyway. So lastly, let's talk about Triple Dark Raid. And this is one of the cards that seemed really cool in preview season way back when. Of course, it's super awesome now. This card is essentially the villain for a cause I believe in. I didn't coin that comparison. Somebody else had come up with it, and that's the way I've been looking at it. It can be a quote-unquote bad Fasibi where you're getting a 3-cost ship. It is possible for you to whiff. You could get literally nothing, or you end up with a punishing one and you already have one on the board and that's it, or something like that. But for the most part, if you play this on Resource 4 or later, you're going to be pretty happy with the results. You're going to be able to push damage. It's going to dig and tutor for things. And if nothing else, even if you get, air quotes, only a 3-cost ship, you've pushed 3 damage or impacted their board if you had to do something. And you'll have a card to play for the next turn, which can be a challenge for the Boba flip turn. We'll talk about that momentarily. And it digs you closer to the other ships that you might want to see. It clears out a lot of the things that may be in the way. Yeah, would you be all right with drawing extra copies of your 7th Fleet or Kylos or whatever? Maybe. But if we're talking turn and resource 4, 5, 6, you probably want to be gearing up to play those raiders, play those fire sprays, or whatever happens to be the case. Obviously, multiple triple darks can be absolutely bonkers. It also allows you to, and this was the mistake I made, and I'll paint the scenario for you. In the top 8, I'm playing against Bossk Blue. I run them over in game 1. I don't want to say it was not close, but I was able to get a buffed Lurking Tie, and they never saw an entrenched. Very, very quick game going into game 2. We board. We set the scenario up. I want to say it was around the Boba flip turn. I was able to once again set up 2 Lurking Ties, 1 buffed, 1 not. I play a triple dark. They are at, I want to say 25 or 26. I'd have to go back and check my notes. And I had the option to either go Fire Spray or disabling Fang Fighter to free up one of the Lurking Ties. And in the moment, I said I could go disabling Fang Fighter, but something convinced me that that was like being too cute for some reason. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to go with the Fire Spray and I'm going to win right now. In my head, ignoring the fact that I would have won, air quotes, right now by freeing up the buff Lurking Tie. So I ended up going on to lose that game like 30 turns later and then lost game 3 in a much more, we'll say, reasonable game from the boss player where they had the removal on time. They had the things that they needed. So I absolutely could have won that game if I didn't play like a dum-dum. But shout out to my opponent. First of all, shout out to all my opponents. That was one I missed earlier. Shout out to all my opponents. They were very cool on the day. The boss player especially, I watched, they were on stream a number of times, so I think everybody felt bad for them at that point. But point is that you have a lot of options with Triple Dark. You can do a lot of things. Now, looking at the sideboard, there's, again, things that you'd expect and things you don't. Wolffe, pretty obvious. You want it against any healing decks. You want to try and time it because they're clearly going to be able to remove it. But if you play the Wolffe on, say, a turn that you expect a Vigilance, if you have first action or they have a client out, you can slam Wolffe, and then guess what? That client's not doing, well, it's doing stuff, but it's not going to actually be healing or representing a potential heal this turn. Odds are you're never going to get to attack with it, so it's really just pay 2. They don't get to heal this turn. I'm not in love with it, but it has a purpose. Outmaneuver is a anti-boba tool. You've seen it in way back, even in set 1. One of the guys from Locals was playing IG-88 space and was able to actually top 8 a showdown with it and showcase the ability for outmaneuver. And I really do like the card in theory. Literally never got played on the day. I think I drew it once after boarding it in. Change of Heart. I was boarding it in against later game slow decks. It didn't, I played it a couple times against the boss player. It didn't really matter. I don't know that it will ever matter. Well, that might be hyperbole. It could matter, but the problem is you need to have initiative, play the Change of Heart after they played Snoke or Avenger or whatever, and they don't have the answer to their own card. Because otherwise you're just kind of resetting the board because it's going to take up your entire turn to take it. You're not necessarily going to follow up with a threat. It's fine. You could also use it against, say, Boba Green or something they slam a maul, you claim, you take their maul, and then maybe they don't have an answer, but they're probably boarding in waylays against you. I didn't like Change of Heart in set 1. I'm not sure about it here. This was not the sideboard that I had used previously, so Change of Heart was a new addition to it. I don't know that I love it. Now, the one that everybody is going to be scratching their heads at and already shrieking about is Look the Other Way. Now, this one, however, I actually really liked. I think it's really cute, but also effective. So the intent here is you realistically do not need to sideboard against anything except Boba Yellow. That is your nightmare matchup. That is public enemy number 1. And anytime you sit down across from it, you have to assume you're going to lose. It is, I don't want to say 90-10, but it's probably close to that. It's bad. You can absolutely play very well and still lose. They could play very poorly and still win. And there's not much you can do about it. Cunning is a card. And their bodies can, like, you don't get to resource cheat because they get to resource cheat back, and they're able to present significant threats. Every deck has bad matchups. However, Look the Other Way gives you a tool to try and combat some of that. No Good to Me Dead is probably the best card in that matchup. You'd love to land it on the Boba flip so that way it messes up their flip turn. They miss out on all those resources, and they were probably setting it up. It prevents at least 8 damage because they could have attacked twice. It prevents the untaps on the next turn. It does a ton of things. Look the Other Way is like a bad No Good to Me Dead. It could tap down a Boba. It could mess up their math. Or here's another thing that really can blow you out is the resource for Cunning. They played a body on turn 1. They played a body or 2 on turn 2. And then they Cunning. They tap down your guys. They buff one of theirs. And then they are way, way ahead in the race. All right, I'll look the other way on the guy that you buffed. Ouch down population you, bro. And there's nothing they can do because even if they untapped one resource by bouncing a guy instead of tapping them down, it doesn't matter. So this could function as a half a No Good to Me Dead on the Boba turn. It could function as a Cunning counter spell, sort of, kind of. It messes with it at the very least. I think there's a lot of value in this, given the game plan you're trying to execute. Is it going to last the long term? Like, will set 3 feature Look the Other Way a lot? I don't know. Honestly, I think I'd rather have a third one of those than either Change of Heart or Outmaneuver. But I was taking everything on faith at the time, so it is what it is. So is this worth playing? I know there are some PQs that were postponed. I know there are, of course, well, there probably are showdowns that are still happening. There's going to be some set 2 events because we have a few weeks, at least at the time of this recording, before everything switches over and gears up for set 3. I think the deck is fun. Would I recommend playing it? Yeah, probably. If you don't feel that there's a ton of Boba Yellow, then you're probably fine. So if, based on the numbers I'm looking at, don't play this if you're in Europe. Boba Yellow seems to have a higher percentage there. Maybe, at least based on the PQs. The deck really, as I was joking about before, it's not really a joke. It kind of doesn't need to sideboard. This is a fantastic best of 1 deck if you're going to locals. You will probably make some people upset because it is very fast. It is very linear. And that's something that people will frequently get up in arms about. And I can't blame them too much. Triple Dark Raid is definitely something that I am excited to finally be getting some value out of, leveraging in some way. And Ruthless Raider is also just absolutely bonkers. I like playing the space boats. I gotta admit, it's a super fun deck. If you have any questions about it, feel free to hit me up in the comments. Or of course, you could hit me up on Discord. Links for everything and my contacts and stuff are all in the description. So that's the deck. The only other pieces that I guess I will comment on for the day is I am very much looking forward to what FFG has to say for the rest of the competitive seasons going forward, because I've said it in a number of videos and certainly in Discord and forum posts and whatever. Pick someplace I've said it. I think FFG has done a spectacular job in creating an awesome game. I think anything that is ancillary to the game, whether it's the organized play system, it's the tournaments, it's the distribution, it's the communication, it's the streams, it's the promos, it's this, it's that. That's all been doo-doo. And it's to the point of being embarrassing, to be perfectly honest. And I'm hoping that they clean that stuff up. We don't really have any other option other than to be hopeful. The game is fantastic, and I really don't want to see it implode because of those sort of things. I don't want to see it implode at all, but certainly not for things that are very much fixable and correctable and that sort of thing. We'll have to see. We'll have to see. That's pretty much it. If there's anything else, like I said, let me know, but that's going to do it for this time. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And tune in next time for more Random Thoughts.